Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional and a well respected coach from New York City, USA, Anita Kishore. Anita, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Anita is an executive coach, a facilitator, and an instructor. So, Anita, you began your career as a scientist and later moved into management consulting before becoming an executive coach. What were the pivotal moments that led you to make each of these transitions?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's really delightful to be here in conversation with you. My transition has been to become an executive coach. Very few people are born an executive coach. There are
Mhm.
usually career transitions along the way
Correct.
and decisions. In my case, the underlying factor was always the people.
Mhm.
So I've always liked the people doing the thing or doing the job more than the actual job itself. So
Mhm.
that was my theme. I followed or was convinced by great people
Mhm.
along the way.
Mhm.
Of course, these careers are not, they have some elements in common, but
Yeah.
they can be quite different.
Mhm.
Science, consulting, coaching. So I thought I would follow in the path of my family, follow in their footsteps to become a physician.
Mhm.
In university, I majored in chemistry and shifted gears a little bit. I like the science more
Mhm.
so than just the application of the science. Majored in chemistry, liked the graduate students and faculty. I shared their values.
Mhm.
But many degrees along the way, I wanted more practical application
Mhm.
of that work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that led me to management consulting.
Mhm.
In chemistry, in sciences, 80%, it's not unusual for people who are getting higher degrees or advanced
Mhm.
degrees to leave academia. In my case at the time, 80% of people with degrees and PhDs in life sciences would leave academia and take a job in what we would call industry.
Mhm.
I was just following that path, the
Right.
80%. That figure is now actually 94%. So most
Mhm.
people don't stay in the
Right.
university.
Right.
I made some decisions, went into management consulting because it was aligned with the business interests that I had.
Mhm.
And leaving consulting, consulting was actually quite exciting. It actually gave me some exposure to coaching
Mhm.
because senior partners in management consulting firms often act as trusted advisors to their clients.
Mhm.
So I got a taste of that, eventually moved into the pharmaceutical industry, which was probably where I wanted to be from the very beginning, but more
Mhm.
on the people side of things, leading teams.
Mhm.
And when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, when I was in the division of Novartis, I was lucky enough to have an executive coach, and that was transformative.
Mm, amazing, amazing. You describe yourself as a straight shooter with deep empathy. How did that balance develop over your career? And was it always comfortable?
When the first time someone described me as a straight shooter, I'd never heard that term
Mhm.
before, and I
Mm,
had to inquire what it meant.
mm,
And when I understood some of the subtlety behind it, I realized, the connotation may not be that great. So
mhm,
maybe I need to soften my edges a little bit.
mm, mm,
And I think the hardest thing to accept for me has been that two things can be true at once.
mm,
So you can be a both and. We're so accustomed to binary thinking. You
mm,
must be this or that. When I was a scientist or a consultant, I was more focused on the people side of
mhm,
things.
mhm,
When I stepped into coaching, the feedback I frequently received was, Anita, you're so analytical. And it wasn't often said as a compliment.
mm,
It took me a long time to braid and embrace both of these threads,
mm,
and they both describe me.
mm,
I can be direct, open, honest, but it's always on a basis of kindness and empathy.
mm. Great response. And what personal leadership challenge most influenced the way you now coach senior leaders and public servants?
As a coach, part of your training
Hmm.
is to what we say, work on yourself.
Right.
And that means understanding your values, your motivations. But as you as you are active in the practice of coaching, you also have to get over yourself,
Mm,
meaning get over your own desire to be smart,
mm,
to give advice, to solve the other person's problems,
mm,
to make them feel better.
mm,
So Michael Bungay Stanier talks about taming your advice monster.
mhm,
And that is the hardest advice for someone who comes from my background, which is problem solving and consulting. I want to solve people's problems, or I want to solve problems in general. That's been my entire training throughout
mm,
my life, and
mm,
and this makes it relatable when I work with executives because your job is to solve problems,
mhm,
technical problems, people problems, problems that your team come to you with. So
mm,
there's this natural desire, I want to solve problems. The
mm,
biggest eye opener for me was when I did executive coaching training.
mhm, mhm,
And you start to notice, you get questioned or queried by
mm,
the people that you're training with. And so I did this coaching from I Coach Global, where I'm also now a faculty member. It's executive coaching training.
mhm,
And the hardest thing for me was when people would ask me, Anita, why are you asking these questions?
mm,
What's going on for you at the time? Why do you want to solve their problems? Is
mm,
it about you or is it about them?
Very
And so
interesting.
confronting your own
Yeah,
desire. I'm sorry,
absolutely.
yes.
Great response. Moving on, Anita, many of your clients are high IQ achievers. What are the most common blind spots you see among intellectually strong leaders?
Analytically minded executives, intellectually strong leaders
Mhm.
have been successful due to their intellect,
Correct.
and sometimes in spite of their intellect.
Absolutely.
So that desire to be smart,
Mhm,
to solve the problems, to share a perspective, to
mhm,
share their point of view, particularly with certain kinds of leaders,
mhm,
particularly in academia or where your brilliant thoughts are valued the most. That isn't always the right answer. That
mhm,
isn't always the right way of showing up.
mhm,
So if you think about dials, like
mhm.
volume dials on
Yeah.
an old radio, if your intellectual dial is turned up maximally,
Mhm,
one of the hardest things for the intellectually strong leader is to first notice that dial is up because it's just second nature to them. It's normal. That's how
yeah.
they've been trained.
Sure.
That's how they're supposed to behave. So first, even noticing and accepting, oh, I guess I am, that's part of my brand. That's part of my personality. I am
Mm,
intellectually strong. And the second is, oh, maybe I have to turn that volume down, turn
mm.
that dial down a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
So there's a process of self-awareness in
Mhm,
there. There's a process of unlearning. And then there's a process of saying, well, shoot, if I can't depend on this particular spike,
mhm.
how am I supposed to lead or behave? And
Right.
that's where the real work of coaching comes in.
Well said. You also work extensively with women and underrepresented leaders. What systemic and internal barriers show up most in such coaching conversations?
Thank you. Uh, as someone who is a woman, identify as
Mhm.
a woman, and
Yeah.
I am part of an underrepresented group here in the US,
Mhm.
though not necessarily historically or what we refer to as traditionally represented. Um, barriers show up for women, underrepresented groups, but in the work that I've done with career coaching and executive coaching, I find that barriers show up for anyone who is not a part of a dominant group.
Mm,
So in an organization, in typically for-profit organizations or large organizations, that has largely meant anyone, regardless of race or gender, who's
mm.
not in sales and marketing.
Sure. Sure.
So the challenges that I see are broader than just working with individuals, with women or underrepresented leaders.
Mm,
Some of these challenges, such as lack of confidence, the desire for executive presence,
mm,
or receiving imprecise feedback and not knowing how to act on that.
mm,
There's research that shows that certain groups do not receive specific and precise actionable feedback. And what
mm,
do I mean by that? If you're if you're working in an organization, if you've received feedback, you
mm.
just have to show up more confidently in meetings.
Yeah.
You need to speak up more. Okay, but help me understand. Can you give me an example of where you
Mm,
saw that?
mm,
What steps could I take to work and develop that? These are some similarities. These are similar to the challenges that I see
mm.
working with a broad swath of leaders,
Yeah.
sometimes in the quieter functions like
Absolutely.
R&D
Yeah.
or research.
Very interesting. My next question for you, Anita, is why is emotional intelligence often harder to develop than technical or strategic skills?
For some people, emotional intelligence is second nature.
Mm,
But for many of us
yeah.
who have been trained and rewarded for other skills,
Mm,
technical skills, strategic
yeah.
skills, it's not as easy or as comfortable. It's
Mm,
just a different thing.
yeah.
If you have been a tennis player all your life, is it as easy to switch to basketball? Well,
Mm,
maybe it is, because if you are athletic, maybe
mm,
you can
mm,
easily pick this up.
yeah.
But maybe there's a bigger difference
Mm,
between the technical skills and strategic skills and the emotional skills.
mm,
And there are some professions that, by design, have high barriers to entry.
mm,
You have to gain a lot of technical, strategic, scientific skills. And some of these professions might pay more as
mm,
a direct result of the barriers to entry. This is
mm.
classic Porter's five
Yeah. Yeah.
forces thinking.
Mm,
Now, look, it's not to say that all of life's problems and answers, or problems and delights are associated with capitalism.
sure.
That's
Sure.
for another discussion, but
Mm,
it is instructive to pay attention to what society values. Some professions will value emotional intelligence more than others, and that's
mm,
where we sometimes have tension in our
mm.
society.
Correct. Correct. And what signals tell you that a leader lacks self-awareness, even if they are outwardly successful?
Such a lovely question, because sometimes it's very quick to
Mm,
come, and sometimes it takes a little more digging.
mm,
But the easiest test you can ask a leader, when you ask your team, what what did they think
mm,
about what you did or what you
mm,
said?
mm,
Or what feedback have you received on this action
mm,
or this message? And if they respond with a blank stare and say, I have no idea, I
mm,
never thought to ask them.
mm,
For leaders, especially very senior leaders, it can be
mm.
very lonely at the top. It can
Correct.
be difficult to receive feedback. It can sometimes they fail to ask for it or forget to ask for it. So the ability to hold the mirror to oneself can be challenging. In executive coaching, there are
Yeah.
some tools to help
Mm,
facilitate that. But
mm.
that simple question, what does somebody else think, can reveal a lot.
Absolutely. Well said. Let's now talk about mindfulness, Anita. That's another area of your specialization. How has your own mindfulness practice evolved since becoming a teacher and a practitioner?
I have a tendency to sign up for things and not realize how much
Mhm.
work they are once I
Correct.
get into it. And this program that I completed, the Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program,
Mhm.
was quite an intensive 2 year online certification with practicums, with homeworks,
mm,
with regular meetings and small groups and larger groups,
mm,
journaling. But the end result is that it's become a daily habit without effort.
mm,
It's just part of my routine. And I notice when I skip it, when I fail to get in my session in the morning, by
mm,
evening, I notice something's off. And for me, how it shows up is a little bit of feeling off in my body. So for me, mindfulness manifests as an awareness of sensations in my body. That's not the
mm,
same for everyone, but this is how I notice it. So, for example, I might feel a little bit more physically off balance. When you're stressed or feeling tension,
mm,
sometimes your shoulders, in my case, my shoulders rise, and practically touch my ears.
mm,
And my shoulders might feel so high and frozen. But when I'm mindful, I
mm,
can consciously lower them, straighten my posture. Or, for example, if I'm in a meeting, I'm multitasking, I'm looking at someone else, paying attention, I think, to what they're saying, but I'm
mhm,
also on my phone. I am responding to an email. I find that I think that I'm multitasking and paying attention to both things. But what I really notice is that the minute I put the phone away, I'm suddenly able to hear what's happening in the room. So it's
mm,
as if my the sensation of what's happening, just the listening disappears. It's like those volume dials
mm.
again.
Yeah,
I stop listening to what's happening because I'm fully focused on my phone.
yeah.
And then I put the phone away and the dial changes, that volume
Mm,
dial changes again. So these are very specific and physical sensations that I notice
mm, mm,
that may not be true for everyone.
mm.
But that's how it's changed me. And what it all leads to is just an awareness. Oh, this is happening at the moment.
Very
Then
interesting.
I can choose. Do I still want to focus
Hmm.
or lack of focus,
Mm.
or should I stop?
Amazing. In moments of high uncertainty or crisis, how can mindfulness change the quality of a leader's decision making?
The advice that and here I am saying giving advice, but the message I think of mindfulness, particularly for executives, is
Mm,
take a pause.
mm,
So, for example, one of my clients is actively working on this concept of
mhm,
taking a pause. And
mm,
for him, that means not reacting immediately out loud with words or facial expressions, body language when something or someone sets him off.
mhm,
And he's an emotional guy, and that's what
mm,
makes him a great leader. He has
mm.
high emotional intelligence.
Correct.
But when one displays all of their emotions to others,
Mm,
that can be challenging for others. As a team, you might know, who am I going to get on
mm.
this particular day?
Yeah.
So being able to pause before displaying one's emotions
Mm.
can help the leader think about what kind of decision they're making.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. What emotional patterns do you commonly see in leaders navigating large scale change?
They say change is hard in the beginning,
Absolutely.
messy in the middle, and gorgeous at the end.
Correct.
William Bridges, who wrote the book on transitions and change over
Hmm.
50 years ago,
Mm,
described all of this. And at the beginning of a large-scale change, what sometimes happens in organizations
mm,
is that leaders don't always think about the emotional side
mm.
of change.
Yeah.
They understand that there's a change management process and change needs to happen, and they're
Mm,
so focused on the end that they forget that the individuals in the organization have to go through a transition themselves.
mm,
So what happens is not just that the role might change or the content changes, but the way of working changes.
Mm,
The people that I interact with, who I hand off a process to, or I need to receive information from, may
mm,
not be the same anymore. I have to change my way of working.
yeah.
Maybe they lose their wife or work husband. So there are different emotions
Mm,
associated with all of those phases. In the beginning, that loss, there is when change is hard in the beginning, there's fear, anger, denial. In
mm,
the middle, there can be a lot of uncertainty, confusion. What is happening? Where are we going?
mm,
And at the end, it could be excitement,
mm.
relief. We finally know where we're going. But there could also be
Sure.
some individuals who haven't yet arrived at that
Mm,
state.
mm. Well said. Anita, I have time for three more questions for you. My next question is, how can leaders model resilience without appearing detached or emotionally unavailable?
This is something that I work on with my clients
Mm,
because emotional sharing one's emotions can help the leader connect with their team. But many of my clients either are a little skeptical of that belief, or they may be
mm,
skeptical because they don't know how to show their emotions.
mm,
They've been told in certain environments that they should not show emotion, that
mhm,
that is not leader-like. And sometimes in corporate environments,
mm,
individuals say, I can only show certain emotions. I can be happy, I can be disappointed, I can be angry. But sharing emotions is part and parcel of being a leader.
mm,
So I like to work with certain tools of emotional intelligence to help leaders feel a bit more comfortable,
mm,
expand their emotional vocabulary,
mm,
and make it comfortable for them to show their emotions, which then in turn helps their team
mm,
be able to articulate and share their emotions.
mm. What a great response. Two more questions. What inner work do leaders most often avoid? And why is that work so essential?
There are different kinds of leaders,
Yeah.
and there are some who will, as we've been discussing, who are avoid this work of the self-awareness,
Mm,
connecting their emotions to their self-awareness.
mm,
But I think it depends on the leader and their type of personality.
yeah.
As an example, some leaders speak up a lot.
Hmm.
Some leaders don't speak up that much.
Yeah.
But what are the reasons behind that? So sometimes uncovering those, why does a leader feel the need to speak up?
Hmm.
That may be some of the inner work the leader needs to do.
Yeah.
Or if they have a different style of leadership and they are letting somebody else speak all the time and they're
Mm,
waiting until the end, one might say, oh, that's a great strategy. I'm going to adopt that. I should always do that.
mm,
But what is the reason that leader is doing that? Is that out of another reason? Is it because they've got something else going on in their mind? They're not paying attention.
mm,
Is it because of some other underlying thing? They don't want to interrupt somebody else. They feel
mm.
rude. So it's unique. And there's no, I wouldn't say there's any
Sure, sure, absolutely.
one type of inner work
Yeah,
that people
yeah,
avoid.
absolutely. And my last question for you, Anita. If leaders could take away just one mindset shift from coaching and mindfulness, what would you hope it would be?
Take the pause.
Hmm.
As I said that without pausing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would ask them what's going on in that first moment of reaction. What
Mm,
emotion is it? Slow down. Can you identify that? Is it
mm,
fear, anger, shame, embarrassment, excitement,
mm,
curiosity? What is it? What
mm,
is it? And there may be more than one emotion.
mm,
Slowing down to identify it forces that leader to notice it, name it, give it a nod.
mm. Well said. And on that note, Anita, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been with you. We covered a lot of ground on coaching. And thank you for talking to me about your own incredible journey, what took you to coaching. Thank you for speaking to me about emotional intelligence, about self awareness, about mindfulness, about resilience. And your last three words, which are so important, take the pause. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.